60.9 years. That is the official figure for how long a woman in the UK can expect to stay in good general health. For a man, it is 60.7. If you are in your late 50s or early 60s, you have probably already clocked how close that number sits to your own age. Here is what nobody tells you about it. That number is a national average. It was never built to be a personal countdown. The gap between that average and your real number could be hiding 15 extra good years you are not using, sitting there while you wait for a someday that never quite arrives. Or it could be warning you that you have far fewer good years left than you assume, and every month spent being overly cautious is a month you do not get back. Nobody tells you which one is true for you. If you have ever typed into a search bar something close to how many healthy years do you actually have left, or wondered whether it is too late to retire early, you already know the answer online is a mess. Half the advice tells you to wait longer and build a bigger pot. The other half tells you to walk out the door tomorrow without checking whether your pension can actually carry you that far. In a moment, I will show you the 2-minute calculation that turns that national average into your own number. Get it wrong, and you either burn through your money faster than you needed to, or you leave it sitting there untouched while your best years quietly run out. That 60.7 and 60.9 figure comes from the Office for National Statistics, and it is built the way most national statistics are built. Millions of individual health records, all averaged into one line. Someone who develops a health problem at 45 pulls the number down. Someone who is still gardening and playing golf at 80 pulls it back up. What lands in the middle is a mean, not a forecast, and it was never designed to tell any single person when their good years run out. So when you see 60.7 or 60.9 quoted in a headline, it is describing the country. It is not describing you. That is the trap. Anyone who takes that flat average and treats it as their own personal deadline is solving the wrong equation. Your health, your family history, and your income all pull the real number in different directions, and none of those show up in a national statistic. Diane is 58, works as a school administrator in Sheffield, and until recently assumed she had the average amount of healthy time left, same as everyone else her age. She had never actually sat down and checked her own number against her own health markers, have you? Here is a rough way to see why that matters. A 65-year-old woman in the UK has, on average, another 21.2 years ahead of her. Of a typical life, the ONS figures suggest around 73% tends to be spent in good general health for women. Put those two together as a simple illustration, not an official forecast, and a meaningful slice of what looks like the rest of retirement on paper is not guaranteed to be healthy time. This is not an ONS prediction. It is just a way of seeing why the average number can quietly mislead you. This is not about being reckless with your pension. It is about being honest with your own timeline instead of borrowing someone else's average. Why does almost everyone fall into this trap the same way? Standard retirement guidance is built to protect against running out of money, so by default it plans around the longest possible life for everyone, regardless of what your own health actually looks like. That approach keeps providers and planners safe from ever being blamed for a shortfall. It does not necessarily protect you from losing years of enjoyment if your real healthy window turns out shorter than the average they planned around. Nobody is plotting against you here. It is simply the safest assumption for the system, not necessarily the best one for you personally. If you have never actually worked out your own number instead of borrowing the UK average, that is exactly what this channel does every week for people your age. Subscribe now so you do not miss the calculation. But knowing your number is only half of this. The other half is whether you can actually afford to act on it. So how do you actually build your own number instead of borrowing the national one? There are 3 things worth putting into it, and none of them require a specialist appointment to start. The first is your current health markers. Blood pressure, cholesterol, weight, and anything your GP has already flagged at your last checkup. The second is family history. Not just how long your parents lived, but how many of those years they spent independent and active rather than in decline. The third is lifestyle load. A sedentary desk job and a physically demanding one do not wear a body down at the same rate, and neither does a stressful role compared with a calmer one. None of this requires anything more than the checkup most GP surgeries already offer to people in their late 50s, plus an honest look at how the working week actually feels by Friday. None of it needs to be perfect on the first attempt. It just needs to be honestly done. Take those three, place them against the ONS baseline of 60.7 years for men and 60.9 for women at birth, or 18.7 and 21.2 further years from age 65, and you get a number that moves up or down from the average rather than sitting on top of it. That shift, not the original average, is your actual planning figure. Diane's version of this looked encouraging rather than alarming. Her GP checkup came back with normal blood pressure and normal cholesterol. Both of her parents lived independently into their late 80s. The one thing pulling in the other direction was her job, which is sedentary and often stressful. On balance, the framework nudged her estimate above the 60.9 average rather than below it, which meant she was likely underspending her time and her money relative to her own real window, not overspending it. I used to tell people the safest move was to always assume you would live to the oldest age anyone in your family reached and plan around that. I have changed my mind on that one. Assuming the longest possible life by default is not caution. It is just a different kind of guess, and it can quietly cost you years you actually had. Here is the trade-off nobody spells out. If you plan only around the flat national average and never adjust it, you end up making one of two mistakes without realizing it. You either hold back on spending or activity in years you are genuinely likely to be healthy, treating money you could use now as untouchable. Or you swing the other way and assume you have more good years than your own markers actually support. Building your own number does not remove the uncertainty. It does mean the decisions you make about part-time work, spending, and travel get weighed against your real risk profile instead of a borrowed one. So say your number comes out higher than average, like Diane's. That is good news, more good years to plan around. But for most people watching this, the thing actually stopping them is not their health at all. It is their bank balance. While you are working out your own healthy years number, the government has quietly moved one of the pillars your plan probably rests on. The state pension age started rising from 66 to 67 on the 6th of April 2026, phasing through to April 2028. If you were born on or after the 6th of March 1961, your state pension age is now 67, not 66. If your early retirement plan was built around collecting the state pension at 66, that plan is a year out of date. The bridge of savings you need to cover before the state pension arrives just got longer. At exactly the point where your healthy years are the thing you should be protecting most carefully. A year does not sound like much on paper. In practice, it means another 12 months of drawing down savings, or working, or both, before that guaranteed income starts landing in your account. If you had budgeted tightly around your own number of healthy years, a year at the wrong end of the calculation is not a rounding error. For context, the full new state pension for the 2026 to 2027 tax year is £241.30 a week, which works out to roughly £12,547 a year. That is a floor to build on, not a full retirement income on its own for most people, and it now arrives a year later than a lot of people assumed when they first started planning. So the safe answer is not simply wait until the state pension arrives to feel secure. For a lot of people watching this, waiting is not realistic anyway, whether that is about money, health, or simply how much longer they can face the job they are in. Here is the version of the plan that still works even if you cannot fully stop working. Most retire early advice assumes you are sitting on a large pension pot. Most people are not. Median pension wealth for people aged 55 up to state pension age, counting everyone including those with no pension savings at all, is £37,600. Even among people aged 55 to 64 who do have a pension still waiting to be drawn, the median value is £107,300. Neither number funds an early exit on its own. That is exactly why treating early retirement as all or nothing keeps people stuck. If the only options in your head are quit outright or keep working full-time until the state pension arrives, most people watching this will default to the second one, because the first one clearly does not add up. There is a middle version, and it is closer to what the 1000 days idea was always describing. Instead of one binary switch, you phase down, fewer days a week, a stretch of unpaid leave, downsizing to free up equity and reduce the hours you need to cover. The point is reclaiming healthy time now, not waiting for a specific pot size that may never arrive on schedule. Diane could not fully retire on her pension at 60. What she did instead was move from a 5-day week to a 3-day week, keeping some income coming in while buying back 2 days a week of genuinely healthy time straight away. That does bring in a tax detail worth knowing before you do the same. The income tax personal allowance is £12,570 and it is frozen. The full new state pension already sits at £12,547 a year, just £23 below that threshold, which means any part-time income sitting on top of a state pension is very likely to be taxable, and it is worth factoring that into a phased retirement income plan before you hand in your notice, not after. If you are under roughly 53 today and were planning to dip into a private pension early as part of a phased wind-down, there is one more change to know about. The normal minimum pension age, the earliest point you can access a private pension, is confirmed to rise from 55 to 57 on the 6th of April, 2028. I have sat with the spreadsheet at 11 p.m. trying to make a part-time salary and a small pension line up on paper. It is fiddly, unglamorous work. It is not a neat formula that spells an answer. It is trial and error until the numbers behave. If you are already doing a version of this, fewer days, a smaller role, easing out instead of stopping dead, tell me your hours in the comments. It helps me know what to cover next. Phasing down buys you time. It does not automatically protect you from the thing that actually derails most retirement plans, the shock nobody schedules. Here is where the theory meets something less comfortable. Say a health scare arrives during those phased retirement years, a diagnosis that limits mobility for a few months. It happens to plenty of people in their 60s, whichever path they took to get there. Picture Diane living out the version where she never built her own number. She planned around the flat national average, told herself she still had plenty of time, and kept deferring the things she actually wanted to do until after full retirement. The scare arrives before she has used any of the healthy years she assumed were simply guaranteed to be there waiting. She is still covering the same mortgage payment and the same car insurance renewal she always has, except now some of the money that could have funded a few good years is sitting in an account she was too nervous to touch. Now picture the version where she had already built her own number and moved to a 3-day week. A 65-year-old woman in the UK has, on average, another 21.2 years ahead of her, and Diane had already spent some of that time actively rather than banking every bit of it for later. The scare is still hard. Nobody is pretending otherwise. There is still the GP prescription cost to manage, and still the mortgage payment due at the end of the month, whatever else has changed. But it is not compounded by years of deferred living stacked on top of it. Neither version of Diane is powerless in that moment, whatever else is going on around her. The difference is not whether something difficult happens to you, because you cannot fully control that. The difference is how much of your healthy window you had already used well before it did. Ask yourself honestly which version sounds closer to how you have been planning so far. So if delaying is not free, and going all in on spending everything right now ignores the fact that shocks genuinely happen, where is the actual middle ground? Here is a strange pattern worth naming plainly. Plenty of people who have technically got enough for a phased or partial retirement still cannot bring themselves to cut their hours or spend on the years they have worked out are genuinely healthy ones. It is not really about the maths at that point. After 20 or 30 years of being rewarded for saving, for not spending, for keeping the buffer topped up, Your instincts treat spend less, work more as the safe default. That habit does not simply switch off the moment the numbers say you are actually fine. It was built to solve a different problem, not having enough, and it is still running even once that problem has technically been solved. Think about the last time you delayed something small, a weekend away, a new coat, a proper day off, because the account balance felt safer left alone. That reflex rarely gets questioned. It just gets obeyed. If you have got a decent pension and you are still nervous about cutting your hours or booking the thing you have been putting off, that is not a character flaw. It is the same instinct that got you to this point in the first place. It just has not caught up with your new numbers yet. There is one useful way to interrupt it. Stop asking yourself, can I afford to do less? Ask instead, what does one healthy year actually cost me if I keep waiting? That is not a savings question anymore. It is a healthy time question, and it lines up with the number you worked out earlier, rather than a spreadsheet balance that keeps growing regardless of whether you ever use it. None of this works, though, without an actual plan you can act on this month. Here is the short version. 3 things to actually do with all of this, each with one number attached, so it is not just a feeling. First, get your own number, not the average. Use your next GP checkup, or the results you already have, and hold them up against the ONS baseline of 60.7 years for men and 60.9 for women at birth, or 18.7 and 21.2 further years from age 65. That is your starting point to adjust up or down, not the finished answer. This is not about achieving perfect precision. It is about having a number more honest than a national headline before you make any big decision. Second, price one phased retirement move before you make it. Model what dropping to 4 days, then 3 days, actually does to your take-home pay against the personal allowance of £12,570. It is a small thing to check beforehand, and it saves an unpleasant surprise on the first payslip after you have already changed your hours. Third, pick one thing you have been calling someday and move it into this year specifically. Not the biggest thing on the list, the one that is actually affordable now, sized to what you can genuinely do with the money and time you already have, rather than the version that waits for a bigger pot. Small and actually done beats big and permanently deferred, and it does not need to wait for the year your pension finally feels big enough. Diane nearly did not ask her employer about reduced hours at all. She assumed the answer would be no before she had even asked the question. The conversation took about 20 minutes, and the request was approved within a fortnight. Which of those 3 would actually move the needle for you first? The health number, the hours, or the one thing you would bring forward this year? Say which one in the comments. None of this required Diane to hit some magic pension number. It required her to stop using someone else's average as her own deadline. Here is the short version of everything we have covered. Build your own healthy years number instead of borrowing the national average, because that average was never describing you specifically. Then treat early retirement as something you can phase into with the pension you actually have, not the one you were told you would need before you were allowed to start. I do not know your health, your family history, or your exact numbers. Nobody watching this can plug those in for you from a screen. What I can tell you fairly confidently is that the national average almost certainly is not your number either. It will not look dramatic from the outside. It rarely involves a big leap, more a few honest sentences on a page, checked against your own GP results and your own pension statement, rather than someone else's average. It usually starts with one honest conversation, not a grand plan. If this is the first time you have actually thought about your own healthy years number instead of the UK average, that is exactly the kind of question this channel is built around. Subscribe if you want the next one. Diane's version of the 1000 days idea was never a countdown clock ticking down to 0. It was a number she finally sat down and worked out for herself, using what she actually knew about her own health and her own money, rather than a figure that was built to describe the whole country at once. That is the version worth working out for yourself too.